Metacognition is often described as thinking about thinking, but that phrase is too vague to be useful. In practice, metacognition is the internal system that determines how accurately you judge your own understanding, how efficiently you learn, and how effectively you adapt when your current approach fails. Two people can spend the same amount of time studying, working, or problem solving, yet one improves rapidly while the other stagnates. The difference is rarely intelligence. It is almost always metacognition. Metacognition is not a single skill. It operates across distinct levels, each one adding a deeper layer of awareness, control, and correction. These levels build on one another. If a level is weak or missing, thinking becomes inefficient, biased, or overconfident. Understanding these levels is essential for anyone who wants to learn faster, think more clearly, and make better decisions in complex environments. The first level is cognition itself, often called object-level thinking. This is the most basic form of mental activity, and the one people use almost constantly. At this level, the mind is focused entirely on performing a task or processing information. You are reading words, solving a problem, listening to someone speak, recalling information, or reacting emotionally to a situation. Your attention is directed outward toward the content, not inward toward your mental process. Cognition is necessary because it is where all thinking happens, but it is also limited. When you operate only at this level, you have no reliable way to detect misunderstanding. If something feels familiar, you assume you understand it. If an answer comes to mind quickly, you assume it is correct. Mistakes are usually discovered only after consequences appear, such as a wrong answer, poor performance, or negative feedback. Many people never move beyond this level, which is why they repeat the same errors despite effort and experience. Cognition without oversight is execution without accuracy. The second level is metacognitive awareness. This is the point where you begin to notice your own mental state while thinking. Instead of being completely absorbed in the task, part of your attention shifts inward. You become aware of whether you are confused, distracted, guessing, or genuinely understanding. You may notice that you are reading without absorbing meaning, or that your confidence does not match your actual knowledge. Metacognitive awareness does not automatically improve performance, but it is essential because it reveals problems that would otherwise remain hidden. At this level, you can recognize uncertainty instead of mistaking it for understanding. You can detect when emotions are influencing your judgment. You can notice when attention drifts or when mental fatigue sets in. This awareness answers a critical question: what is happening in my mind right now? Without awareness, there is no possibility of correction. With awareness, improvement becomes possible, even if it has not yet occurred. The third level is metacognitive knowledge, which involves understanding how your own thinking tends to work across situations. This is not moment-to-moment awareness, but accumulated insight. At this level, you know which strategies help you learn effectively and which ones waste time. You understand your cognitive strengths and limitations. You recognize patterns in your mistakes and the conditions under which they appear. Metacognitive knowledge allows you to predict performance instead of being surprised by it. For example, you may know that passive rereading creates false confidence, while active recall exposes gaps in understanding. You may understand that you perform poorly under time pressure, unless you practice retrieval beforehand. You may recognize that multitasking reduces accuracy, even when it feels productive. This level transforms learning from trial and error into a structured process. Instead of asking why something did not work after the fact, you begin to anticipate what will or will not work before you begin. The fourth level is metacognitive regulation, which is where metacognition becomes active and powerful. Regulation is the ability to deliberately plan, monitor, and adjust thinking in real time. At this level, you do not merely notice confusion, you respond to it. You do not merely know which strategies work. You choose them intentionally and abandon them when they fail. Metacognitive regulation involves deciding how to approach a task before starting, checking progress while working, and making adjustments as needed. If comprehension drops, you slow down or change methods. If a strategy produces poor results, you replace it rather than persisting out of habit. This level allows correction during execution instead of after failure. It is the difference between reactive thinking and adaptive thinking. People with strong metacognitive regulation waste less effort because they stop doing ineffective work sooner and redirect their energy strategically. The fifth and highest level is metacognition, sometimes described as reflective self-monitoring. This level involves evaluating the accuracy of your own metacognitive processes. In other words, you reflect not just on your thinking, but on how well you assess and regulate that thinking over time. This level is rare because it requires questioning your own self-judgment, including your confidence in your ability to self-correct. At this level, you examine whether your preferred strategies are still valid or whether they have become outdated habits. You question whether your self-assessments are accurate or inflated. You recognize that even reflection can be biased and incomplete. Metacognition prevents long-term stagnation by forcing periodic recalibration of the entire cognitive system. Without it, people often plateau while believing they are improving. With it, learning remains flexible, responsive, and aligned with reality. These levels do not function independently. They form a hierarchy in which each level depends on the ones below it. Cognition provides raw thinking. Awareness reveals its state. Knowledge explains its patterns. Regulation controls its direction. Metacognition audits the entire system. Weakness at any level undermines the whole structure. Awareness without regulation leads to recognized problems that never change. Regulation without knowledge leads to random adjustments. Knowledge without awareness leads to misapplied strategies. True cognitive strength requires integration across all levels. For people between the ages of 18 and 35, metacognition is especially critical. This stage of life involves rapid learning, career development, and frequent decision-making under uncertainty. Information is abundant, but attention and accuracy are limited. Metacognition determines whether effort compounds into skill or dissolves into frustration. It affects how quickly you acquire complex abilities, how well you adapt to new environments, and how accurately you judge your own competence. Metacognition also protects against cognitive traps common in modern life. Overconfidence fueled by surface familiarity, manipulation through emotional framing, and burnout caused by inefficient effort all stem from weak metacognitive control. Developing metacognition is not about becoming overly introspective or slowing down thought. It is about increasing precision. It allows you to detect errors earlier, adjust faster, and allocate mental resources where they matter most. Ultimately, the goal of metacognition is not to think more, but to think better. It transforms intelligence from a fixed trait into a self-correcting system. When metacognition is fully developed, learning becomes efficient, mistakes become informative, and adaptation becomes continuous. You no longer rely on hope, talent, or repetition. You rely on awareness, control, and accurate self-evaluation. Most people invest heavily in tools, information, and techniques while neglecting the mind that uses them. Metacognition is the upgrade to that mind. Understanding its levels gives you a map. Practicing them gives you leverage. That leverage is what turns effort into progress and thinking into mastery. Everyone told you the formula. Work hard, stay consistent, keep learning. And you did. You followed it precisely. So why are people who started after you already ahead of you? Not because the formula was wrong, because the formula was incomplete. It told you what to do. It never told you how to examine the mind doing it. There is a layer of cognitive skill that sits above every other skill you have. It does not care how talented you are. It does not care how hard you work. It operates underneath all of it, silently determining how fast you learn, how accurately you judge yourself, and how quickly you recover when things go wrong. Most professionals never find it. You are about to. Let's begin. Consider two analysts at the same firm, same training program, same manager, same resources. After 2 years, one of them is consistently promoted. The other is still producing the same quality of work he produced on day one. The firm assumes it is a talent gap. It is not. The first analyst has developed the habit of examining her own thinking. She notices when she is guessing versus when she genuinely understands something. She tracks which conditions make her judgment unreliable. She adjusts her approach mid-task when her current method stops working. She does not wait for annual feedback to recalibrate. She recalibrates daily. The second analyst is technically competent, but he has no system for monitoring or improving the mind doing the work. He studies harder when results are poor. He rarely identifies why the results were poor in the first place. So the same mistakes return, packaged slightly differently each time. The difference between them is not capability. It is metacognitive skill. And metacognitive skill is not one thing. It is a set of distinct, trainable abilities. Here is every one of them. Skill 1. Comprehension monitoring. The first skill is comprehension monitoring, the ability to accurately detect, in real time, whether you understand something or only believe you do. This distinction matters more than most professionals realize. Familiarity mimics understanding. If you have heard a term before, your brain signals recognition, which your mind interprets as knowledge. Comprehension monitoring breaks that false signal. It forces a clean question: can I explain this from first principles, or am I pattern matching a surface impression? Professionals who lack this skill accumulate confident gaps, areas where they believe they are competent and are not. Professionals who develop it accumulate accurate maps of exactly what they know and where the edges are. Skill 2. Self-evaluation. Self-evaluation is the ability to assess the quality of your own output before external feedback arrives. It requires establishing internal criteria and applying them honestly. The challenge here is that self-evaluation is systematically distorted by effort. When you have worked hard on something, you perceive it as higher quality than it is. Skilled self-evaluators learn to detach assessment from investment, to look at their work as a stranger would, with no memory of the effort it cost. Without this skill, you are entirely dependent on external feedback loops, which are slow, incomplete, and often politically filtered. With it, you compress the learning cycle significantly. Skill 3. Strategy selection. Strategy selection is the ability to match your cognitive approach to the demands of a specific task, rather than defaulting to whatever you have always done. Most professionals have one or two habitual learning methods, typically rereading and highlighting, and apply them regardless of whether the task calls for memorization, conceptual understanding, pattern recognition, or procedural skill. Each of these requires a different cognitive strategy. Developing strategy selection means building a working inventory of cognitive approaches and the conditions under which each one outperforms the others. It transforms effort from repetitive to targeted. Skill 4. Planning. Metacognitive planning is the practice of structuring a cognitive task before executing it, identifying what you need to know, what you do not know, and what sequence of steps will close that gap most efficiently. It is different from project planning. Project planning arranges tasks and time. Metacognitive planning arranges thinking itself. It asks which mental operations need to happen in which order to produce reliable understanding. Professionals who skip this step spend significant time in the wrong cognitive mode for a given problem. Metacognitive planning eliminates that waste before it begins. Stop here for a moment. Of the 4 skills we have covered, comprehension monitoring, self-evaluation, strategy selection, and planning, identify the one you are least confident you actually practice. Hold that in mind. The next 5 skills are where it gets sharper. Skill 5. Monitoring. Monitoring is real-time awareness of your cognitive process while a task is in progress. It answers the question, is what I am currently doing actually working? Without monitoring, you can spend 40 minutes on an approach that failed in the first 5, not out of stubbornness, but because you were not observing your own process closely enough to detect the failure. Monitoring makes that detection automatic. It is the difference between flying with instruments and flying by feel. Both get you into the air. Only one reliably gets you where you intended. Skill 6. Error detection and correction. Error detection is the ability to identify specifically what went wrong after a poor outcome, not in general terms, but with enough precision to prevent the same failure from recurring. Most professionals perform a shallow version of this. They register that something did not work, feel a brief negative response, and move on. Skilled error detection goes further. It isolates the exact point of failure, identifies the assumption or process that produced it, and extracts a testable correction. This skill turns every mistake into usable data rather than discarded experience. Skill 7. Cognitive load management. Cognitive load management is the ability to recognize when your working memory is approaching its limits and to restructure tasks accordingly before performance degrades. Working memory is finite. When it exceeds capacity, thinking becomes shallow, errors increase, and judgment deteriorates, none of which are obvious from the inside. You feel busy, not impaired. Cognitive load management makes the impairment visible before consequences appear. In practice, it means knowing when to simplify a problem, when to write something down instead of holding it in memory, and when to stop entirely rather than continue producing low-quality work under cognitive strain. Skill 8. Bias recognition. Bias recognition is the ability to identify when a cognitive shortcut is distorting your reasoning and to correct for it before acting. Confirmation bias, the Dunning-Kruger effect, sunk cost reasoning, availability heuristics. These are not character flaws, they are architectural features of human cognition. The question is not whether they are operating in your thinking. They are. The question is whether you can see them clearly enough to compensate. Professionals who develop this skill do not become bias-free. They become bias-aware, which produces materially better decisions in conditions of uncertainty. Skill 9. Reflective recalibration. The final skill is reflective recalibration, the periodic reassessment of your own metacognitive system. It asks not just whether your thinking is working, but whether your framework for evaluating your thinking is still accurate. This is where most professionals plateau. They develop effective self-monitoring habits in their 20s, and those habits carry them for several years. Then conditions change. The complexity of their work increases, the stakes shift, the cognitive demands evolve, and the old habits no longer fit. But because those habits were developed through deliberate effort, they feel like competence rather than inertia. Reflective recalibration prevents that plateau by forcing the question, is the system I use to evaluate myself still calibrated to the work I am actually doing? It is the most uncomfortable skill on this list, and the most necessary. These 9 skills are not independent. They operate as an integrated system. Comprehension monitoring and self-evaluation produce accurate data about your current state. Planning and strategy selection use that data to structure effective action. Monitoring and cognitive load management keep that action on course in real time. Error detection and bias recognition process failures and distortions as they appear. Reflective recalibration audits the entire system at regular intervals. Remove any one element, and the system degrades. Strong planning without monitoring produces well-structured efforts that drift without correction. Strong error detection without bias recognition produces accurate postmortems that still repeat the same distorted inputs. The value is in the integration. What this produces, in practice, is not a slower or more laborious way of thinking. It is a faster one. Because errors surface earlier, wasted effort is identified sooner, and correction happens before consequences accumulate. Most people watching this will do nothing with what they just learned. They will close this video, open the next one, and continue operating exactly as they did before. That is not a criticism. That is just how information consumption works without metacognitive intervention, which, ironically, is exactly what this video was about. But some of you caught that. And those are the exact people this channel exists for. If you are in that second group, prove it. Name the one skill you are committing to developing this week. Put it in the comments. Public commitment is the first act of regulation. Subscribe. The next video will demand even more from you,